Hero dog rescues owner from fire at midnight. What they found will leave you in tears. If you love animals and want to watch more amazing stories, don't forget to subscribe to help the author. Let's begin. Miguel sat on the couch, his weary eyes fixed on the muted television screen, though his thoughts were elsewhere. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creaking of the wooden floors as if the house itself was breathing, holding on to the memories of years gone by. It had been 2 years since Maria's death, and though the sharp edge of grief had dulled somewhat, there were days when the absence of her presence felt more profound. The empty spaces in their home, the empty chair at the dinner table, were constant reminders that the life they had built together was no longer. Yet, Miguel had somehow learned to carry on, finding solace in small routines in the mundane. He glanced down at Rex, the German shepherd who lay stretched out at his feet, the dog's chest rising and falling in a rhythmic pattern of deep, peaceful breaths. Rex had been with Miguel through it all, the late-night talks about life, the long walks through the park where they both found a semblance of peace, the days when Miguel had simply needed a companion to fill the silence. Maria had always insisted that the dog would bring Miguel some much-needed company, but she hadn't known just how much Rex would end up meaning. Rex wasn't just a pet. He had become Miguel's anchor. When Maria's sudden illness had struck, and she had been taken from them so quickly, it was Rex who had stood by Miguel through the storm of grief. It was Rex who offered silent companionship during the quiet, tearful nights when Miguel felt utterly lost. The house, despite its sense of emptiness, had become a haven of sorts, a sanctuary where Miguel could retreat from the outside world, where he didn't have to face the overwhelming weight of his loss. He had never been one for crowds, never someone who sought out loud, bustling interactions. Instead, he had created a life of small comforts, the aroma of fresh coffee in the morning, the rustle of papers as he worked from home, the quiet hum of the fridge in the kitchen. The walls of the house had absorbed so many memories of laughter and joy, but also of pain and quiet reflection. And in this house, Rex had come to be a symbol of the constancy of life. No matter what happened, no matter how much time had passed since Maria's death, Rex was always there, loyal, dependable, unwavering. It was a typical evening in Miguel's routine. The sky outside had darkened, and the only light in the living room came from the soft glow of the lamps and the flickering television. Rex remained in his position, a solid, comforting presence by Miguel's side. It was moments like this that Miguel truly appreciated the simplicity of life. No need for grand gestures or extravagant plans. Just the stillness of the night, the quiet companionship of his dog, and the faint hum of life continuing despite everything that had happened. They were enough, weren't they? Miguel allowed his gaze to wander to the mantel above the fireplace. There, framed in glass, was a photo of Maria. It had been taken at a family gathering just before their daughter, Sophia, had left for college. In the picture, Maria was laughing, her head thrown back in joy, and Miguel stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, a smile on his face that spoke of contentment. Those were the days when life had felt certain, the days when they had taken things for granted, the small moments, the quiet evenings, the shared smiles over dinner. They hadn't known then how fleeting those moments would be. Miguel let out a long, slow breath, a mixture of sadness and gratitude swirling within him. He was thankful for the memories, for the love that had filled their home. But that love had left an empty space in his heart, one that would never quite be filled. The grief of Maria's absence had woven itself into the fabric of his daily life, present but not always at the forefront of his mind. There were days when he would go hours without thinking of her, and then there were moments like these, quiet and introspective, when the weight of her absence was overwhelming. But in these moments, there was comfort, too. He wasn't alone. Rex was there always. Miguel reached over to the coffee table and grabbed the remote control, flicking through channels absently. There was nothing he wanted to watch, no show that seemed to hold his attention. Instead, his mind drifted back to the life he and Maria had built. They had worked hard for everything they had, their home, their family, their future. They had dreamed of growing old together, of sitting on this very couch in the years to come, watching the sun set through the windows. But those dreams had been shattered when Maria's illness had taken her. Now, all that was left were memories, fleeting and sometimes painful. The house, the familiar scent of it, was both a refuge and a constant reminder of what was lost. Suddenly, Rex lifted his head, his ears twitching as though he had heard something Miguel had not. The dog's body tensed, and he stood up, his paws making soft pads against the floor. Miguel's eyes flicked over to him, watching with curiosity as Rex paced back and forth, his eyes alert and focused. This was unusual. Rex was a calm, well-behaved dog. He didn't normally react to things that weren't there. Was something wrong? Rex? Miguel called softly, trying to get his attention. The dog ignored him, his gaze fixed on the hallway that led toward the bedrooms. Rex's ears were flattened against his head now, and his low growl reverberated through the quiet house. Miguel felt a sudden shift in the air. It was as if something had changed, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. Rex's growls grew louder, more insistent. Miguel's heart began to race. Was someone in the house? He hadn't heard the front door open, and there was no sign of movement from the windows. Rex's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, and Miguel's concern deepened. The dog darted toward the hallway, his paws clicking on the floor as he moved with purpose, his body stiff and alert. Miguel stood up slowly, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. "What's going on, boy?" he whispered under his breath, moving cautiously behind Rex. Then it hit him. The unmistakable scent of smoke wafted through the air, sharp and acrid. It was a smell that made Miguel's heart skip a beat. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was there a fire? The house had always felt safe, secure. How could this be happening? Rex was barking furiously now, his barks echoing through the house. He was pulling Miguel toward the front door, urging him to leave, to get out of the house. Miguel's eyes flicked to the hallway again, his breath catching in his throat as he saw the faint flicker of light in the distance. Flames. The fire was already starting. Panic surged through Miguel's chest as he realized the danger they were in. Without a second thought, he rushed to the door, his hands fumbling with the handle as he struggled to open it. But in his haste, he wasn't fast enough. The fire was spreading quickly, creeping up the walls, curling around the corners of the rooms. The heat was already beginning to suffocate him, and the smoke was thick, making it hard to breathe. "Come on, Rex," Miguel shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency. The dog was standing beside him, now tugging at his sleeve, pulling him away from the door. Rex was trying to get him to move, to leave, but Miguel hesitated. The house, their home, was all he had left. He couldn't just leave it behind. But then Rex barked again, more urgently this time, and Miguel realized the dog wasn't just reacting to the fire. Rex was trying to save them. In that moment, Miguel understood. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about survival. They had to get out. They had no time to waste. As Miguel followed Rex down the hallway, his mind raced with thoughts of what could have caused the fire. Was it an electrical issue? A malfunction with the wiring? He had always been careful, had taken steps to ensure everything in the house was in order. But now, it didn't matter. What mattered was getting out alive. Rex led him to the back door, but as they reached it, something unexpected happened. Rex suddenly turned and bolted toward the bedroom at the end of the hall. "No!" Miguel shouted, instinctively reaching out to stop him. Not back inside. But Rex was already too far ahead, his eyes locked on something inside the room. Miguel's heart raced. What was Rex doing? What was inside? Before he could react, Rex disappeared into the flames, disappearing from sight. Miguel's heart pounded in his chest as he stumbled through the narrow hallway, the thick smoke curling around him in choking waves. Rex's bark echoed off the walls, frantic and urgent. It was a sound Miguel had never heard from the dog before, an almost desperate cry, full of fear and instinct. For a split second, Miguel questioned if this was a nightmare, his mind grappling with the possibility that none of this was real. But the heat, the smoke, and the overwhelming stench of burning wood were all too real. His breath was shallow, his lungs searing with every gasp of air he managed to draw in. "Rex, get out of there!" Miguel shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the chaos of the fire. The flames had spread faster than he could have imagined. The house that had once felt like a fortress of memories now felt like a death trap. Every second seemed to stretch into eternity, the heat and the smoke closing in on him from every direction. His thoughts scrambled. His mind was racing, filled with questions and doubts. Was there time to escape? Would Rex be okay? Miguel turned back toward the bedroom where Rex had darted into the flames. His first instinct was to run after the dog, to pull him out of the danger, but a sudden wave of heat stopped him dead in his tracks. The fire was growing too quickly, spreading with terrifying speed. He could feel the walls around him growing warmer, the fire licking at the edges of the hallway as though it was alive, hungry. The fire was everywhere now, a beast with a mind of its own, consuming everything in its path. But where was Rex? Miguel's pulse quickened. The dog had always been his protector, his loyal companion through thick and thin. They had weathered many storms together, but this was different. This was not just an ordinary emergency. This was life and death. And Rex was charging into the heart of it, without a second thought, determined to save something or someone, even if it meant putting his own life at risk. Miguel fought the instinct to stay where it was safe, to flee. The front door was just a few steps away. If he could make it to the street, to safety, it would be over. But Rex's frantic barking tugged at his heart. There was no way Miguel could leave the dog behind, not when he knew the animal was charging into the flames to rescue something. The thought of Rex, his brave, loyal dog, running back into that inferno made Miguel's resolve harden. With no more time to waste, Miguel pushed forward, coughing as the smoke filled his lungs. Each breath felt like a razor scraping against his throat. The heat was suffocating, and he could feel sweat trickling down his back. He wasn't sure how much longer he could last. But then he heard it, the faintest sound, like a soft meow from deep within the fire. The family's cat, Luna. Rex was going after Luna. Miguel's heart sank. He knew the cat was small, delicate, and easily frightened. Luna had been part of their family for years, ever since she'd been a stray kitten that had wandered into the yard. She had been Maria's pet, and while the cat had always adored Maria, she had come to love Miguel and Rex too. Luna and Rex had developed an unlikely friendship. While Rex was large and protective, Luna had a quiet, almost ethereal grace about her. They were an unusual pair, but somehow they complemented each other perfectly. The bond they shared was a testament to the unconditional love animals had for those who cared for them. Miguel's thoughts raced as the picture of the two of them, Rex and Luna, flashed in his mind. He could already feel the weight of guilt pulling at his chest. If something happened to them, it would be his fault. He should have acted faster, gotten out of the house sooner. He should have noticed the signs of trouble earlier, but instead, he had let complacency settle in. And now, Rex was going back for Luna, and Miguel wasn't sure if he could make it in time to stop the flames from taking everything he loved. Panic surged through Miguel's veins, his feet moving almost automatically as he sprinted down the hallway, following the familiar sound of Rex's barking and Luna's frightened meows. The fire had spread too quickly for Miguel to track exactly where Rex had gone, but he could feel the heat intensifying with each step. The hallway seemed endless, each step heavier than the last. As he rounded the corner toward the bedrooms, he saw Rex again. The dog had darted into the master bedroom, where Luna's meows were now louder, more frantic. Rex's tail was raised high, his body tense, every muscle in his frame coiled and ready to act. But the fire was right behind him. Miguel cursed under his breath, his stomach churning as he neared the bedroom. The flames had already reached the doorway, licking hungrily at the edges of the doorframe. The fire seemed to recognize Miguel's presence, as if it had eyes of its own, as if it knew he was coming for something. The heat was unbearable. He could feel it seeping into his skin, burning him even from a distance. The smoke grew thicker, the air harder to breathe. "Rex," Miguel shouted again, his voice hoarse with desperation. "Get out of there. Now." But Rex didn't respond. The dog was locked onto the task at hand. His eyes were trained on Luna, who was huddled under the bed, clearly terrified. She was too small to have any hope of escaping on her own. Rex had always been protective of her, despite the stark difference in their size. He was a natural guardian, always looking out for those who needed him, even if it meant putting himself in harm's way. Miguel had never seen the dog this determined. Miguel rushed forward, coughing violently as the smoke thickened. He knew he had to act fast, or he would lose both Rex and Luna. There was no time to think. His body moved instinctively, and he pushed through the heat, the smoke, the fear, reaching the bedroom door. His hands, shaking and weak from the smoke, fumbled at the door, trying to open it wide enough to get inside. The fire surged around the doorframe, forcing him to take a step back. He was losing precious seconds. Inside the room, Rex's low growl echoed through the air, warning anyone or anything to stay away. But the flames were all-consuming now, and Miguel could see that Rex was struggling to breathe, his fur singed from the heat. There was no time to lose. With a surge of adrenaline, Miguel shoved the door open, breaking through the barrier of flames. Rex was standing at the foot of the bed, his eyes fixed on Luna, whose fur was bristled with fear. The cat didn't understand what was happening. She was frozen, trapped by the flames closing in on her. Rex had her cornered. He was protecting her, standing between the fire and his friend, as if to say, "You're not alone." Miguel grabbed Rex's collar, his grip firm despite the overwhelming panic. "Come on, boy," he urged, his voice barely audible over the roar of the flames. "We've got to go." But just as he turned to leave, he felt the ground beneath him tremble. The fire had reached the ceiling now, and the room was beginning to collapse. The walls shook, and debris started to fall. The heat was unbearable, and the smoke was blinding.
It was a race against time.
Rex's body was still tense, ready to bolt if he had to, but his eyes turned toward Luna one last time, as though ensuring the cat was safe. He knew what Miguel had to do. They couldn't stay in this room any longer. With a final, reluctant glance at Luna, Rex turned and followed Miguel out of the room. The fire seemed to grow more intense as they made their way down the hallway. The house was crumbling around them, and every step felt like it might be their last. They weren't out of danger yet. Miguel pulled Rex close to him, trying to shield him from the smoke. But the dog was strong, resilient, and had saved him, just as he always had. As they neared the door, the heat felt unbearable, but they were almost there, almost free. The fire's roar grew louder with each passing second, as if it were mocking their every move, gaining strength in its relentless pursuit. Miguel's heart thudded against his chest, every beat a reminder of the urgency of the situation. His hands, slick with sweat and grime, trembled as he gripped Rex's collar, pulling the dog toward the front door. The thick smoke twisted around them, swallowing everything in its path. Their escape route, once familiar and safe, had now become a narrow, suffocating tunnel that seemed to close in around them. It felt as though the house itself was trying to crush them, its very walls creaking and groaning under the weight of the fire. The warmth from the flames was unbearable, searing their skin, and the acrid smell of burning wood and plastic made it almost impossible to breathe. Miguel's thoughts raced. How had it all gone so wrong? Just hours earlier, he had been in his living room, sipping coffee, content and unaware that his world would soon be turned upside down. Now, everything he held dear, his home, his memories, his family, was being reduced to ash. And in the midst of this chaos, there was Rex, his loyal companion, who had already risked his life to save Luna, the family cat. They had escaped the bedroom, but there was no guarantee they would make it out alive. The flames had spread faster than Miguel could have ever imagined, fueled by the dry wood of the old house. He could hear the cracking of beams above them as they stumbled toward the front door, the sound of their escape muffled by the sound of flames devouring everything in its path. But Rex wasn't just following orders. The dog's instincts were kicking in, and Miguel could see the determination in his eyes as he pushed forward, his tail held high, his body tense. There was no fear in Rex's movements, just focus. The fire might have been dangerous, but Rex wasn't backing down. The dog had already proven his bravery by running into the flames to save Luna, and now he was standing by Miguel's side, keeping them both going through sheer will. Rex was more than a pet. He was a lifeline, and Miguel had to trust that his companion's strength would get them through this. Miguel's throat was raw, his breaths coming in ragged gasps as he fought to remain calm. The front door was close, so close that Miguel could taste the fresh air that awaited them beyond. But even as they neared their escape, something seemed off. The heat was unbearable, the flames were encroaching upon the doorframe, and the entire structure of the house seemed to be shifting beneath their feet. They weren't out of danger yet, not by a long shot. The path to the door was becoming more and more difficult to navigate as the smoke grew denser, the flames swirling faster around them. "Come on, Rex," Miguel urged, his voice hoarse from the smoke. He pulled harder on the dog's collar, trying to make it through the hallway faster. But Rex hesitated, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. The dog's attention was momentarily diverted, his gaze fixed on the kitchen area, where Miguel could barely make out the flickering glow of flames behind. The smoke. Rex's body stiffened, and Miguel could see the dog's muscles tense as he began to pull away.
No, Rex.
"We need to go now," Miguel shouted, panic rising in his chest. But Rex wasn't listening. The dog turned and dashed toward the kitchen, his movements swift and purposeful. Miguel's heart skipped a beat. There was no time to waste. They had to get out of the house immediately, before the flames engulfed everything. But Rex had already made up his mind. Without thinking, Miguel let go of the collar, realizing that he had no choice but to follow. The dog was his responsibility, and he couldn't leave him behind. Miguel took a deep breath and followed Rex, feeling the smoke burn his eyes as he stumbled through the thick fog. Every step seemed like a fight, the pressure of the fire bearing down on him from all sides. The heat was unbearable, and the world around him seemed to blur as he tried to focus on the dog's movement. Rex was already several paces ahead, darting around the corner toward the kitchen, where the fire was starting to spread through the walls. Miguel cursed under his breath. This was reckless. But he couldn't stop Rex now. They had to work together. They had to survive. As they reached the threshold of the kitchen, Miguel's eyes watered from the smoke, his lungs burning with every inhale. The flames had already reached the countertops, licking at the cabinets. The entire kitchen was a furnace, the fire curling up from the floor and licking the ceiling. But Rex wasn't deterred. He moved with precision, his eyes locked onto the back door that led to the backyard. It was an escape route they hadn't considered before, but it seemed like their best shot now. If they could get outside, they could get to safety. Miguel followed closely behind, trying to shield his face from the heat and the smoke. The back door was only a few steps away, but the flames were rising quickly, threatening to block their path. The air was thick with smoke, and Miguel's head was spinning, the dizziness from the lack of oxygen making it difficult to think clearly. His muscles screamed from exhaustion, but he pushed forward, the sound of Rex's paws hitting the floor his only guide. Just as they reached the back door, a loud crack echoed through the kitchen, and the ceiling above them began to collapse. The beam supporting the roof broke with a deafening crash, sending a shower of burning debris cascading toward them. Rex yelped in alarm, darting backward as a piece of burning wood landed just inches from his paws. Miguel's heart stopped in his chest as he saw the flames surge toward them, the kitchen now a furnace. They were trapped. Without thinking, Miguel grabbed Rex by the collar and yanked him toward the door. The handle was hot to the touch, and for a moment, Miguel thought they were going to be locked inside. But with a desperate twist of the wrist, he managed to pull the door open, sending a burst of fresh air into the smoke-filled kitchen. The sudden rush of air seemed to ignite the fire even more, the flames jumping toward them like hungry beasts. But they were out. Miguel and Rex stumbled into the backyard, gasping for breath as they collapsed onto the grass, both of them covered in soot and grime, their bodies shaking with the aftershock of the fire. The house, now an inferno, continued to burn in the background, its walls groaning as the fire consumed everything in its path. But for the moment, they were safe. Rex lay beside Miguel, his body still tense, but no longer frantic. He was panting heavily, his chest rising and falling with each breath, his fur singed from the flames. Miguel reached out, his hand trembling as he stroked the dog's fur. It was still warm, but there was a sense of relief that washed over him. Rex had made it out. Miguel had made it out. They had both survived. But the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. Miguel looked over at the burning house, his heart heavy with grief. Everything he had known was gone. His home, his memories, the place where he had spent so many years with his late wife, was now nothing more than rubble. But despite the loss, Miguel knew one thing for sure. He was still here. And so was Rex. They had made it. They had survived. But there was a long road ahead. The fire may have been extinguished, but the emotional scars were just beginning to form. Miguel's heart continued to pound, a dull thrum echoing in his chest as he lay on the grass, gasping for breath. His hands were covered in soot, and his clothes clung to his skin, damp with sweat and ash. His entire body ached, a bitter reminder of the battle he had just fought. The fire had torn through his home with merciless speed, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. As he gazed up at the sky, the cool night air felt like a blessing, though it did little to quell the gnawing panic that still gripped his heart. His mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. How had the fire started so quickly? Was Luna safe? Was anyone else in the neighborhood in danger? And, more pressing than any of these, what now? Rex was still by his side, his body pressed against Miguel's as if offering silent comfort. The dog's fur was singed in places, his breathing shallow but steady. Despite the chaos of the situation, Rex remained remarkably calm, his instincts guiding him even when it seemed as though the world had descended into madness. Miguel looked down at him, gratitude swelling in his chest. Without Rex, he would not be here.
There was no doubt about it.
"Good boy, Rex," Miguel muttered, reaching down to stroke the dog's head. The dog's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, Miguel saw a flicker of understanding, as if Rex knew that the worst was over for now. The loyalty and connection between them were palpable, stronger than any words could convey. But even as Miguel tried to comfort the dog, his mind was still racing. The fire was not the only danger. The aftermath had already begun. He could feel the weight of their survival settling on his shoulders. The world around them had transformed in a matter of minutes. The warmth of the fire still lingered in the air, the acrid smell of smoke and burning wood thick in their nostrils. The distant sounds of sirens filled the air as neighbors rushed to put out their own fires, their voices blending into a chaotic soundtrack of destruction. But even in the midst of this, Miguel knew that survival came with a price. The house that had been his home for years was now a smoldering ruin, reduced to nothing but a charred skeleton of its former self. All his memories, the photographs of his late wife, the family heirlooms, everything that had once given his life meaning, was gone. The fire had stolen them all in one fell swoop. Miguel clenched his fists, trying to suppress the overwhelming sense of helplessness that threatened to consume him. It was hard to breathe in the heavy smoke that still lingered in the air. The tears that had welled up in his eyes were not just from the smoke. They were the result of something deeper, a profound grief that he wasn't ready to face.
But there was no time for that now.
Survival came first. Rex's presence was a reminder of that. The dog had brought him out of the fire, had given him a second chance at life, and now it was Miguel's turn to be strong for the both of them. "We need to get help, Rex," Miguel said softly, pulling himself to his feet. His legs trembled, but he forced himself to stand. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in, and with it came the clarity of purpose.
There were no more choices to be made.
They had to survive. They had to make it through this disaster. Miguel glanced around, trying to get his bearings. The fire had already spread to the houses on either side, and he could see the flickering glow of flames from the neighboring properties. He had to make sure that help was on the way. The sound of sirens grew louder, but they felt distant, as if help was still a world away. Miguel knew he couldn't rely on anyone else just yet. The fire department would arrive soon enough, but they needed to be prepared. With Rex by his side, Miguel walked toward the front yard, where the flames had been fiercest. The ground beneath his feet was uneven, strewn with debris from the collapsed house. Pieces of charred wood, broken furniture, and shattered glass littered the ground, remnants of the life Miguel had once known. It was a stark contrast to the serenity of the morning, when he had still been sipping coffee and reading the newspaper, oblivious to the danger that was about to consume his world. As they moved forward, Miguel's mind began to clear. It was as though the fire had burned away the fog of confusion that had clouded his thoughts. He had a responsibility to Rex, and now he had a responsibility to himself. They were survivors. He couldn't allow himself to be consumed by the weight of their loss. His wife was gone, and now his home was too. But Rex was still here. They still had each other. "Let's find Luna," Miguel said with determination. He knew the cat had been with them when the fire started, and though he hadn't seen her in the chaos, he hoped that she had somehow escaped the flames. The house might be gone, but if there was a chance to save her, they had to take it. Rex's ears perked up at the mention of Luna's name, and he immediately began to sniff the air, his nose twitching as he followed a scent that only he could detect. Miguel was glad to see Rex's instinct kicking in. The dog had already proven himself to be a hero, and now it seemed that his sharp senses would lead them to Luna. Together, they made their way around the side of the house, where the fire had already begun to die down. The house was now a smoldering wreck, the flames reduced to little more than embers. Miguel's heart sank as he looked at the ruins, hoping against hope that Luna had escaped. As they rounded the corner, a soft meow echoed from behind a stack of burned furniture. Miguel's pulse quickened as he rushed forward, and Rex's tail wagged in response, his nose still guiding him toward the sound. It was Luna. She was alive. There she was, her fur singed but otherwise unharmed, curled up in a pile of debris. Miguel breathed a sigh of relief as he carefully scooped her into his arms. She let out a weak meow, and for a moment, it felt as though the world was slowly starting to return to normal. The danger wasn't over, but they had survived it. With Luna cradled gently in his arms, Miguel turned to Rex, who was standing nearby, his gaze fixed on his owner with the same loyalty that had led him into the fire. "Good boy," Miguel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The dog had saved Luna, had saved them both. Without Rex, none of this would have been possible. But as Miguel looked at the two animals in his arms, a deeper realization settled over him. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were adapting. The fire had forced them into a new reality, one where survival was no longer a given but a choice. They would have to find a way to rebuild their lives, to face the future without the comforts of the past. The road ahead would be long, but they weren't facing it alone. They had each other. As the fire trucks arrived, their blaring sirens echoing in the distance, Miguel felt an overwhelming sense of exhaustion take over him. It had been hours since the fire had consumed his home, and yet the world still felt unreal, as though he had been trapped in a nightmare from which he couldn't wake. But that had been enough. At least, that's what Miguel told himself, that Rex was enough, that he could manage, that he could move forward with the dog by his side. But the truth was, each time Miguel looked at Rex, he was reminded of everything he had lost. Rex had saved him from the fire, but now he felt like a living reminder of the past, of everything that could never be again. There was the briefest comfort in their daily routines. Each morning, Miguel would take Rex for a walk, and each evening they would share a quiet dinner, just the two of them. But even these small rituals felt hollow, like they were merely keeping the clock moving forward while everything else in Miguel's life stood still. His mind kept returning to the ruins of his home, to the life he had lost, and the memories that now only existed as charred remnants scattered in the ashes. His wife's laughter, her touch, her words, all of it was gone.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.